Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this dialogue with the new Untouchables. This is our 54th episode. We are coming to you, second episode in the new year. It is January 16th on a Friday at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as always, I'll do a quick introduction here. On my top left is Paul Peltier, a veteran of the Department of Justice, also in private practice, and also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. To his immediate right, and
George Washington University.
did I say Georgetown?
Yes, you did.
I
Hey,
apologize.
come
George
on.
Washington University. To his upper right is USC grad, film and television, and principal of Red Point Digital Media, my longtime colleague, Eric Vaughn. To my immediate left is former State Attorney General of Ohio and currently in private practice, of course, with the Dan Law Firm. Immediately below him on his left is June Carbone, who is the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. Down beneath in the Hollywood squares, or I should say the new Untouchable squares, William K. Black, a veteran of regulation and an expert in all things legal perspective on all things the law and fraud and criminology, and of course, best known for his work in the savings and loan crisis. And to his immediate right is, of course, Lewis Clark, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. So, guys, obviously a crazy week. As always, I'm just going to share the screen to kind of just set the tone of what we're looking at in terms of kind of the national media at the moment in the headlines. And on the front page of the New York Times, I thought it was pretty fresh, but also very relevant to have the headline in the upper left-hand corner that just came out about an hour ago. Trump sets fraudster free from prison for a second time. I just happened to read into that, and there was a family of people that had already been sentenced for and convicted of fraud that he's now let out for a second time, or pardoned for a second time. Also, what I thought was really fascinating was you'll see here, obviously all things what's happening in Minnesota, which we'll get to. But on the front page of the New York Times this afternoon, in fact, I'll actually go to another slide here. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is being, I would say, presented as kind of an alternative and maybe someone fighting back against Trump, which brings up a lot of interesting questions, all things considered, with the Federal Reserve, but something obviously we'll discuss briefly. And then moving forward, I thought I'd set the tone, given really just the chaos that we're seeing unfold in Minnesota. And I can't wait to get sort of the insight, understanding from both June and Bill, considering they live approximately 6 miles away from where all of the action is happening. But I want to remind everybody, because I've been watching a lot of video over the course of the week, and there's a lot of scary things that we're seeing, a lot of hysteria, a lot of people shouting from the streets, "My God, what are they doing? I can't believe this is happening. This is the United States of America." And yet, this panel discussion has been obviously warning about things of this nature from the beginning and many more. And I want to remind everybody just kind of a toast or a taste of what Chief of Staff of the White House, Stephen Miller, just said recently to kind of set the tone, and I'll play that briefly.
Let's talk about the threats to ICE officers. What we are seeing from the radical left, from the Democrat Party, is a direct frontal assault, attack on federal law enforcement, on the United States Constitution, and on the bedrock principle that the federal government is the supreme law of the land, that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. You have Democrats in New York City, for example, encouraging the rioters who are assaulting ICE officers, removing criminal aliens from their communities. You have Democrats trying to create tracking apps to tell the criminals, the fugitives, the rapists, the killers, the cartel members where and when ICE is going to be. You have Governor Pritzker trying to get ICE out of his city.
I'm going to stop share just because I'm having
protect illegal alien monsters who are committing crimes against children, against women, instead of protecting American citizens. This is a party.
So I'll bring it back here. I think I hit stop share. And I think the first question that I'd like to ask is to you, June. Can you kind of set the table for what you're seeing currently? I mean, that was recorded 2 months ago, by the way. And so obviously, I don't think a lot of people should have been surprised by some of the action taken by the federal government, considering, of course, what a lot of us have been talking about for some time. But, obviously, this activity this week has been incredible. Can you please give us some orientation?
So I have a lot to say about what's going on in Minnesota. Ask me later. I want to start with a story because I think we're entering a new stage. Many years ago, Bill and I had dear friends who came to visit us when we first moved to California. Friends were in their early 30s. They had three children close in age to our children. We went out every day, museums, the zoo, parks. And every evening, my friend came back with presents for all the children. Presents were inappropriate. There were things like delicate glass figurines that, when given to a 4-year-old, were broken within minutes. And I thought this was unusual. And when she went home, I talked to her husband. The clinching moment was when she was arrested for shoplifting for the second time. The first time she had a plausible story, we believed her. We trusted her. The second time she was diagnosed with dementia at 33. Tragic story. The tell, being attracted to bright, shiny objects and feeling entitled to take them. But this woman had just passed her medical boards, intelligent enough, even in the early stages of dementia, to lie about it plausibly. I want to suggest when we look at Minnesota, there are three buckets for analysis. The first is pure evil, putting Stephen Miller in charge of an express objective of deporting 1 million Black and brown people from the United States, most of whom's worst crime is wanting to be Americans, is evil. And Trump has been about that. The use of Gestapo tactics, cruelty as an end in itself from the beginning. The second category is stupidity. Trump attracts the worst. We know that. Imposing tariffs on penguins is simply stupid. And Trump has been obsessed with tariffs for stupid reasons for decades. But we are entering a third category. And the third category is just flat out crazy. Invading Greenland is crazy. When Trump was interviewed about it, he mentioned national security. The reporter said, "We already have troops in Greenland. The Danes, our closest allies, are willing to negotiate whatever we need for security purposes." And Trump responded, "But it feels different to own it. It is psychologically more satisfying to own it." The New York Times this week, Thomas Edsall, who is as wonkish as the New York Times ever gets, has a column playing on Susie Wiles, the chief of staff's comments on narcissism being like addiction, and laying out how malignant narcissism that feeds on the psychological high of satisfying the ego of hollow people is addictive and psychotic, not just a character flaw, a psychological category that could lead to the incarceration of somebody. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to distinguish malignant narcissism as an epithet from dementia. But the tell, in the case of our friend, is being attracted to bright, shiny objects, acting impulsively and feeling entitled to take them. And I want to suggest we are now entering into a phase where crazy is right there alongside evil and stupid.
Well said. Bill, I'd like to turn it to you with just this tee-up question first. I saw yesterday both Stephen Miller issuing, I guess, messages to all ICE agents that they are immune for their actions. And we saw a front page, obviously, headline in the New York Times yesterday that Donald Trump is moving fast to declare immunity for I believe all of the ICE agents, wherever you want to pick up and go, but hopefully you can maybe address that as well.
Sure. So I still simulate playing soccer at age 74 on a regular basis. And yesterday, completely unprompted by me, one of my friends who has been here as a citizen for 32 years told me that this is probably the last time I'd ever see him because he was going to leave the country because he's a Latino, and the amount of harassment they're getting is sufficiently severe, and it's also a dictatorship, and he doesn't want to be part of it. Uh, this is someone who, worked with our U.S. military. Uh, and the second guy noted that he had just been stopped. Um, Now he's a U.S. citizen as well, also an immigrant, served in the U.S. Marine Corps, honorably discharged and all those good types of things. And this is what a Kavanaugh stop is all about, right? Justice Kavanaugh saying, yeah, it's perfectly okay to take into account as the gestalt, of overall circumstances. Are they speaking Spanish? And do they look Latino? This is what America has descended to. Let me stay with the criminology hat for a moment. Miller, who, again, the whole reason he exists is because the United States allowed immigrants. That is how his particular family was not destroyed in the Shoah, right? And for some bizarre reason, his greatest enemies are immigrants. Now, he did this whole raft. There are X million people, 16 million, and some of them are rapists, and some of them are murderers. Well, of course, if you're talking about 16 million people, there will be some criminals. But what do we know about them as a group, those folks? They are significantly less likely to be criminals than the general population. It's not a small effect, it's a big effect in terms of criminology. So, what do we actually do when we bring in these immigrants? We make the United States not just a more productive and all those other types of things, but also a safer society. And during much of this time period where we supposedly were having these, crime become an epidemic, actually violent crime was going down and down and down as immigration was coming up. So these are people that are deliberately lying, and it's exactly the opposite of what he was talking about here in Minnesota. ICE is attacking people for the crime of protesting, which is to say, exercising First Amendment rights, which is to say, not only not a crime, but something we wish to encourage. That's why it's the First Amendment. And back to why there's a Bill of Rights, because some of the framers said, that original Constitution you did, it has no protection for things like freedom of expression. And we ain't going to sign on unless you make a deal that the first thing you're going to do is introduce this Bill of Rights. That's how we have a Bill of Rights in the United States, because it was thought so critical. We have ICE agents who constantly create confrontations deliberately. And when I say confrontation, that's a polite thing for attacking American people because they don't like ICE and say so verbally. They are throwing chemical agents directly at people sometimes from a distance of 6 feet. They're doing this to women, they're doing it to children, they're doing it to elderly people, they're doing it to ministers. They want violence. That is clearly their goal, and they are so frigging frustrated that they picked Minnesota, and they just can't get enough damn fights. All this Minnesota nice stuff and such. So they're going to pick on other states as well. Uh, and I'll just end with what we've said. Like the phrase 75th Ranger Regiment, Rangers lead the way, whistleblowers lead the way. And whistleblowers are bringing us the key information that demonstrates internally that Stephen Miller is not only lying, but everybody knows he's lying, and that they are creating this not to create peace, domestic tranquility, but to do exactly the opposite.
Well, I was going to go to you, Mark, but I got to, because I was the perfect tee up for Lewis, I got to ask Lewis's response from the standpoint of the whistleblowers, because it just seems to me that, as you had made me aware of earlier today, your organization will be reaching out in a very meaningful way to those within our military, as well as probably ICE, I would imagine, but with kind of a point by point of what the rules are, what the law is, what the rights are, and so on and so forth. But given what Bill just said, can you respond by the whistleblowers leading the way?
Yeah, well, essentially, there are two sort of major things I guess, are happening. One, of course, as we all see, I think it's fairly apparent that Trump does indeed plan to invoke the Insurrection Act, and when he does that, whether it's Minnesota or somewhere else, but when he does that, which is probably not very far off, he'll, of course, be able to then bring in the military, in addition to continuing to flood that zone, whatever zone it is, with ICE agents, and so that's one thing. The secondly is, as we know, 6 members of Congress put out a video, essentially, pretty much just saying what the law is in relationship to soldiers, which is that they are not to obey an illegal order. And it's not only do they have the right not to obey an illegal order, but they in fact are required not to obey an illegal order, which comes down from the Nuremberg trials and then was codified in the Uniform Code of Military Conduct. So basically, it's the law. So that's all they did. And of course, the reaction to that was pretty extreme on the part of the president, wanting to then execute those 6 members of Congress. But that provided a great deal of public education, I'm sure, for the military services people as well, and the National Guard folks. And so we decided to put together a guide, whistleblowing guide for the military services. They do have whistleblower rights established by statute, as well as the Uniform Code, as we know. And it's complicated as well. There's a whole process by which or where members of the services can go to raise whistleblowing concerns. And, there's including their members of Congress. So we put together a step-by-step guide. And we hoped our language is sufficiently understandable to all members of the services. And then, of course, we say at the end of our guide, which is extensive, description of how to blow the whistle. But we also offer services to legal services to those who choose to do so.
Well, that
So next week we're going to, we haven't, published this publicly, but next week we will release the guide.
well, you heard it here first, and thank you for that, Louis, because that's absolutely huge. And please, everyone, get the word out there as quickly as possible. And you can also reach out to me, and we'll get resources to the right people and move this thing out there, especially to influencers, podcasters, everybody who needs to hear it. This is definitely some of the information that could, I hope, turn the tables. Mark, I got to turn this to you real quick from the standpoint that myself included, but I think really the sum total of the reaction that I'm seeing online specifically from some of these shocking images of what are taking place in Minneapolis. The question is first that, I mean, what is the law? I mean, at this stage, okay, and I'm saying that not to be rhetorical, but we all saw what happened in the case of Miss Good. We all saw the reaction by the administration. We've seen the overreach. We've seen all of these different elements, and we heard those of you who've paid attention to these podcasts have heard you from the beginning. You and your colleagues here suggest that state AGs and the states could literally, mobilize sheriffs to engage, lawless behavior of ICE. And then we saw last week, of course, there was the warning order by Tim Walz, right, that the National Guard may engage ICE, both of which that haven't happened. And then the most recent news is Walz telling everyone, stand down, don't engage, don't do this, that, or the other. There's a lot of confusion going on. Can you help parse it out from your vantage of having been a former state attorney general?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, a crime is a crime is a crime. And if an ICE agent commits a crime while engaged in his official or her, I guess there are female ICE agents. I haven't seen any. I guess one's going to run for Congress in Ohio that we heard about this week. But if an ICE agent acting in his official capacity commits a crime, while he may have some degree of qualified immunity from that prosecution, that's a rebuttable presumption that a good prosecutor can overcome. The question was this guy's judgment so bad? Was his decision making so bad as to rise above the level of a person trying to do their job, making an honest mistake, to somebody acting with the mental capacity to commit a crime? And I don't think there's, the New York Times put a nice compilation of all the video angles together that I was able to had a few minutes to watch this afternoon. And I don't think there's much dispute about the fact that this guy knew that what he was doing was wrong. It was also contrary to all the training that he had, to the extent that he had training, and he was one of the trainers. Apparently, he wasn't just a guy that was. I guess I joked last week that he was working for DoorDash the week before, and now he's an ICE agent. And he's not one of those guys. He's a experienced firearms trainer. So he knew better, and I think both from a civil liability perspective and a criminal liability perspective, we can overcome those presumptions, and honestly, for the sake of the democracy, and the sake of our Constitution, those state officials need to get off their ass and do it. Now, Keith Ellison did file suit on behalf of the state in federal court to simply say this surge of ICE agents is not legally necessary, and it's causing more harm than he's causing good, and he has a basis to do that, and so I think he's doing his job. The prosecutor and the police department in Minneapolis need to do their job and investigate this murder, and let the chips fall where they fall. But as the mayor of Minneapolis has been pointing out, very, very, very assertively, as Governor Walz, as am I, and hopefully all of us here, committing a crime in protest is also a crime. and it has the added detriment to this to our country of also being exactly what President Trump wants you to do, because he wants to have a basis that will get him past his handpicked federal judges on the issue of whether he can invoke this Insurrection Act. For nothing more than to, I think, Patrick, I think you hit the nail on the head. For nothing more than to stoke his prodigious ego, and to feed his narcissistic tendencies, to say that he did it because he can. I think that's what we're up against here. We got a president that wants to prove, that has such a complex about his ability to be successful in the things he's done in his life, that he wants to, if he wants to do it to prove he can get away with it, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Iran, whether it's in Minnesota. So we need to see the prosecutors and the state law enforcement officials do their job with a blind lady justice on their shoulder, to call the balls and strikes as they see them. And to present that to a grand jury, which will do its job, who will then, and then if the prosecutor, if an indictment's decided, then to present it to a jury of peers and let them make that decision. The family's going to sue, as they should, because, and I think this is the kind of case where, and we do a lot of 1983 type actions here, where you can overcome that presumptive immunity that those government officials have in doing their official duties. And so, the challenge here is to navigate all this. We am depending, we in Ohio are depending, because we have the next largest Somali community in the country, I might add. We're talking about bringing a civil RICO action against somebody who was committing a series of frauds on consumers, and we've been trying to get the local U.S. attorney interested in prosecuting the case, and somebody suggested in our Zoom call today that perhaps we ought to just tell him they're from Somalia, and that would cause the federal government to get more interested in, and they aren't, by the way. But I don't think that would necessarily matter to these guys. And that's the other thing to remember, by the way, when they're doing this stuff all day long, they're not doing the rest of their job. I mean, and the safety of our communities is at risk. If the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota is not focused on its usual job of identifying and prosecuting drug dealers and fraudsters, and we have an outbreak in a rampant situation with fraud on senior citizens throughout the country, that I spend more time than I'd like to fielding phone calls from people who themselves or whose parents have been ripped off by fraudsters. That's what or looking at these companies that are violating federal laws. Every minute they spend on this nonsense is time away from that. And then you top that off by they're six good prosecutors down it's one district in Minnesota, right? In the district of Minnesota.
One.
Yeah, one judicial district, the District of Minnesota, federal U.S. Attorney's Office. So they have 6 less criminal prosecutors today than they had at the beginning of the week because of this nonsense, and that's going to make all those other prosecutions suffer. You can't hire qualified prosecutors fast enough to fill that kind of attrition that's going on. So while they're while he's pretending we're in ancient Rome where might is right, Rome is burning around Donald Trump, in the country, and I, and the only question left is whether it will make itself evident to everybody before November of 2026 when we have the midterm elections. But I think those kinds of things are going to start to unravel, because when they're spending their time on this bullshit, these guys aren't doing their job. So what does that mean? That means to me, as a former local elected law enforcement official, that the local law enforcement officials need to focus on doing their job, that the local prosecutors need to investigate every single crime that happens in their jurisdiction, including those that are committed by people who are federal agents. To stop pretending, yeah, you would joke about, well, don't act like it's 1950 anymore. Well, don't act like it's 2022 anymore. Act like it's 2025, and worry about federal-state cooperation on future law enforcement investigations in the future. Just because these guys, there's been a historic respect and a mutual respect between federal law enforcement and state. I mean, some of the proudest things that I was involved in is, we ran the Bureau of Criminal Investigation as AG, and which was our crime, our crime labs and our crime data intelligence gathering capacities in the state was our strong collaborations with federal law enforcement. States are safer. People in this country are safer when state and federal law enforcement collaborate with each other and support each other and have each other's back. This is no longer the time for that. That is an anachronistic idea at this point, because some of the thugs are wearing federal ICE uniforms now. Some of the criminals who are committing crime, and the more that the local officials look the other way, the more empowered these guys become. So we are, how many times in the last, however long we've been doing this, is we are at a critical point. We are at an inflection point in American history. Well, this is, I think we are getting closer and closer to that kind of an inflection point where those elected officials are going to be tested. And people don't run for Hennepin County prosecutor to be to take on the federal government. They run because they want to make their community safer for themselves, their families, their friends. But these times call for people to rise above their what their instincts are, and to be the patriots that we all need in this country. And I hope we'll start to see that. I think the private bar has stepped up and brought these cases. Let's hope that the public bar, outside of the certainly the government the government lawyers who are working with Lewis and his team and who are blowing the whistle and who are resigning on principle, they're doing their part as well. But those public lawyers need to do their job, and we all ought to support them in doing that. And people need to, and voters need to understand it. And if you want to do something really meaningful in Minnesota, don't go out in the street and blow a whistle. Email your county prosecutor and tell her to bring the case, to do the prosecution, or explain why she's not doing it.
Paul, I would encourage you to go anywhere you want to, but I just want to do a quick statement / kind of question in between. You and June and Bill and Mark have been transparent and declared it from the very beginning. You've been telling the country what the threats are, what's going to happen, the consequences, and this coming from your incredible background at DOJ. Obviously, Mark just set up what happened earlier in the week, that the 6, obviously DOJ people had obviously quit instead of, I think, investigate the spouse of Miss Good in that particular case. But one other thing did pop up, and I brought this up so many times, and I don't know if you're going to address it or not, but Sheldon Whitehouse addressed again in 2025 suspicious activity reports as it's now relating to all things Chase and Epstein. And again, I emphasize 2025. Anyway, whatever direction you want to go, but I just food for thought.
Well, I this is first of all, it does get worse every day. And it's supposed to get worse every day because that's part of the plan. This is what's happening now, in my view, is not accidental. When Bill says that Stephen Miller, everything he said is the opposite of the truth, it's supposed to be that way. When he says this, you got to realize you got to rely on the supremacy of the Constitution. What does that even mean, right? The supremacy of what clause of the Constitution? I mean, when he says they're going after the rioters, well, there's no riots going on there. The riots, these are protesters, right? And when he says they're arresting, they're getting in the way of people arresting criminals, these are not criminals. These are not criminals. So what is it? It's propaganda. It is exactly propaganda. And it's like Nazi propaganda. What people have to understand is this is real. This is happening. This is purposeful. And it's not just the product of a demented man who is afflicted also with malignant narcissism. This is part of a real plan. When the press is failing us at every step of the way. So Kristi Noem gets up and to defend these ICE agents, and every word out of her mouth is a blatant lie. But worse than that, on the podium in front of her is a slogan, a Nazi slogan from the 1930s, which says, "One of ours, all of yours." And that slogan started when they killed a Nazi officer in Czechoslovakia, and they went in, the Nazis, and slaughtered every male over the age of 17 in this town in Czechoslovakia. This is part of a plan. Wake up. Wake up. It's part of a plan. And it's not just that. Now, they've always planned to dismantle the Department of Justice, which they continue to do, as Dan talked about, right? What they did is they asked these prosecutors to go after the wife of the woman that was murdered. And they stepped down. And these people aren't going to easily get another job in Minnesota, I guarantee you. It was a huge, it is the proof of the ethics of these lawyers that the Department of Justice hired. So we've seen nothing. We have not seen the worst yet. Twice this week, President Trump stated that the elections might not be necessary. Twice he said that. So it is part of a plan. But the good thing is about this is this propaganda is only going to go so far, at least as it relates to that, right? Why? Because Americans have eyes. People saw what happened. People saw them murder this mother. I think of three, but a mother who was there protesting. That could have been my mother. It could have been my daughter. It could have been any one of us. And so people see that. What else do people see? People see how they react when they're called to, not by the press. When that guy at the GM plant said, pedophile protector, and Trump couldn't take it. He said, fuck you, and then he flipped him off with those little sausage fingers that he's got. And so the press needs to get under their skin. They have to stop letting them lie repetitively and start calling out what's really happening here. And this is fascism. It is a fascistic plan that they're putting in place, and it's going to get worse. And the only good thing about what happened this week is people got to see it with their real eyes.
Right. And the second best thing that happened this weekend is the country's hearing directly from Paul Peltier, who just delivered it like the way it needs to be delivered. And thank you for that, Eric. How long have you heard me say, and this is the setup to the next question because of what you've been doing for the last several months, corruption burrs and fuels fascism. we come from this background from all of these geniuses that have taught us the lay of the land of actual control fraud, of how things work in the system to do what? To ultimately do what the government's supposed to in the case of Mark Dan, i.e., getting RICO convictions. No, people, conspiracies aren't theory when you have the facts and the evidence, then you're able to put these things together. Meanwhile, as a documentarian, as somebody who picks up all of these pieces, you have been highly focused and engaged in ICE for quite a while. I think it might be interesting to see what your take is on this whole thing, given what you just heard today.
Well, a couple of things. One, I'm really appreciating that both Paul and Mark are getting really, really close to basically quoting Rage Against the Machine lyrics, and I really appreciate that. So that was pretty cool. I mean, there was a line there, Mark, where I swear it was almost word for word. It's like,
They are from Northern Ohio, Eric, as you know. So yeah.
Uh,
um, but uh, but so some of the things that I am really concerned about, and ICE, is certainly part of this, is that, ICE is the agitation machine, right? They're out there in order to provoke as strong of a response against government officials as they possibly can. And I think that people, I mean, we discussed it on this panel already. I think that we're coming to it that, that I think that Trump is really, he really quite fancies the Insurrection Act. And I think that my feeling is that he very rarely just says something without it being part of like what he has. I mean, he projects his intentions. And if he's saying that he wants to perhaps cancel the elections, I think we need to take that very seriously. And I think that the more he provokes, and and if he gets the reaction that he's looking for, I think that he's going to be able to have in his mind the justification to pull that particular trigger. And I am really concerned about whether or not we're going to have elections this fall. I truly am. And I'm really, there's, there's far too many Democrats, I feel, that are willing to play chicken with this, right? They're willing to hold off until the elections to jump into action. And I think that something that we've discussed here in this space time and time again, especially as it pertains to the attorneys general and so on, is that we can't wait for elections. We simply cannot wait for elections because I think that it is putting way too much trust in what's going on in the world right now to say that with 100% certainty that we're actually going to have elections. And if we do, how free and fair are they going to be? I mean, with Trump and his people, basically doing everything they can to get as much control of the elections ahead of them. If we do have them, I mean, what are they going to show? What are we going to see? I don't really know. And finally, as somebody who has been on the wrong end of a Kavanaugh stop, um, I feel terrified at the simple fact that I don't know. And I think that I'm speaking for an awful lot of people and side by side, when I'm out on the streets protesting these things, that we need to hear more of the good news. And one of the great things that this space does is that when there is good news, when there is a victory, no matter how small or large it is that we talk about it and we get it out there in the world. We need so much more of that. Now, because I know that I feel that the more and more Trump pushes, the more and more he has his ICE thugs do what ICE thugs do, the less and less I feel that there's any part of this government that is going to be able to protect me. And the more I feel that, the more I'm being put in a place to where he's going to get that reaction out of me or the metaphorical me, that's out there. And so that good news, I think right now has to be in the form of the courts, because I think the courts are the only places where we've really seen tangible victories, against against this regime. And we need to see more of them. And when they happen, we need to like get on the rooftops and really shout them out and also see how they're being enforced and make sure that that's being understood by people. Because otherwise, I mean, I think we're right back into I mean, honestly, from the people that I talk to, the main reason why a lot of people didn't vote Democrat in 24 was because they felt that nobody in that party was listening to what was important to them. And so they had nowhere else to go. And so they either didn't vote or they just voted for the person who would at least shake things up. Now, a lot of them regret that vote, an awful lot of them do, but that's where we are. And whether this is reality or not, whether this is like something that is like rational, isn't as important as the fact that this is how people are. This is where people are thinking, and I think that we need to make sure that we are meeting the regular American where they are, understanding where their thinking is, and making sure that we do whatever we possibly can to say that, yes, there are places that can fix this. There are things that can protect you, that this country is not completely lost yet. And if this space online does one thing in order to keep the people on this, on our side, which should be most everybody, basically holding the line, it's going to be that understanding that if we stick together, that there's a way out of this. If we lose that narrative, then I have no idea just how dark this future could possibly be.
Yeah, Patrick, I'd like to talk about the legal game of chess going on right now in Minnesota, and I'm curious what the rest of you think. But I turned in this week my obsession, an article on domestic use of the military for a law review. Started a while ago. And here's where we stand. For reasons not entirely clear, Trump decided to start with Los Angeles, Chicago, Portland, the big cities he most likes to hate, the big cities without mayors kowtowing to him. But the authority he used is a relatively obscure early 20th century act. And that act had language in it that talked about justification for the president to call up the National Guard when defense forces are insufficient. And a clever law professor, Marty Lederman at Georgetown, I think, filed an amicus brief saying that means if the military is insufficient. And the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 vote, bought it. It said, okay, the president, in invoking this, did not say the military is insufficient, therefore there's no justification. Therefore, the Supreme Court, on the shadow docket without a full order, said he has no authority in the pending cases involving California, Portland, and Chicago. And the dissents, and they are Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, are saying, but what about the inherent power of the authority to protect federal installations? What about the Insurrection Act? The Supreme Court did not address the Insurrection Act. And the question is, why did he not invoke the Insurrection Act from the beginning? So the Insurrection Act allows him to call out the U.S. military, and then the various militia acts allow out calling out the U.S. National Guard in the face of certain predicates, but that include law enforcement, that if there is a crisis in law enforcement. So it appears he has been building toward use of the Insurrection Act. He loves the idea of the Insurrection Act. Again, being the 1,000-pound gorilla exhibiting dominance has always appealed to him. ICE is being created as what is in effect a private police force of thugs answerable only to Donald Trump. The statements about absolute immunity are wrong as a matter of law. So what's going on? Well, local listserv here says that there's a rally planned for tomorrow by the racists. I mean, it's called the Racist Rally. It involves people coming from out of town to promote white supremacy, and it is being scheduled for the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, which is down the street from the law school where I teach in the heart of the Somali community. And that's scheduled for tomorrow. And it seems as though they're doing everything possible to provoke a violent response that would justify the Insurrection Act. Why? To show they can do it? To set the stage for an actual coup? To set the stage for interference in the elections? Those are all possible. We don't know what the game is, but this game, the Stephen Miller game, has been designed, as everybody has been saying, in advance as he took office with an idea toward doing it. Trump wanted to do similar things in his first term, and his generals said no. So we've got that about to happen. The lawsuit the state AG filed, by the way, has a wonderful description of several things. First, the ICE officers located in Minnesota, over 2,000, exceed the entire police force of St. Paul. This is an invading army, and they call it that. Secondly, they lay the case out, chapter and verse, that it is retaliation against Walz, that it is targeting people Trump doesn't like, and we know he's been doing that from the beginning. And that the third, it's that a pretext, as everybody's described, that's laid out in the lawsuit. Will the federal courts act on that? They could. The lawsuit lays out the systematic violation of the law, the lack of warrants, the lack of probable cause, the use of masks, the violation of the ordinary order in policing and in the ICE manual itself. Will courts act on that? I don't know. But that's where they stand. And the next step is the effort to provoke this. I would say in the George Floyd riots, well, there are lots of people responsible for the George Floyd riots. There's also a group coming in from outside Minneapolis who were provocateurs. How much? We don't know. I mean, they were there. We know that. They did some things that provoked a counter response. We know that. How big a part? We don't know. And I don't want to overstate it. But that's what we're facing over the weekend.
I guess the question then would be to you, Bill, to respond, add further comment, and then on down the line to all of you, because that's what I heard June open it up to all of you.
Okay, so first, just a cleanup item. Mark referred to 1983. It's a federal statute that gives a right to bring civil rights actions. And that brings to mind also how important a civil suit was in the past to prevent a large number of these abuses. And there was actually a settlement agreement in which the Republican Party was, for many years, in hundreds of places, deliberately trying to intimidate black voters in particular. And there was a really good case against this. The Republicans signed a consent decree that allowed a federal judge with jurisdiction over that agreement to issue injunctive relief. And I think that expired like 8 to 10 years ago, the term of it. And since then, there's been much resurgence of this Republican interference. In addition to saying twice about not holding elections, Trump has said publicly this week that he regrets not seizing the voting machines the last time around that he lost. So that tells you another mechanism that's obviously Miller has put into his brain as to the suite of things that they're going to do. And then for all of you who are, not under the age of, say, 37 or so, I'm definitely not that, but to build on what Paul was saying, it ain't one case. of this deliberate signaling of outright Nazi ideology. It's like the seventh or eighth time in the last 2 weeks they've done this on social media quite deliberately. So they did a slightly Americanized version of Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, right? Just I think 2 days ago and such. The Greenland thing is actually a coded thing that is very popular on the neo-Nazi social media stuff. That Greenlander choice thing, that's an homage. There are a whole bunch of other homages. Now think of this: a president of the United States has put in charge of the key media communications. So these are multiple people for the express purpose of signaling to this part of the base. And they are doing it repeatedly. People are calling them out on it, and they are repeating it and repeating it. So, yeah, they're going to bring in to just a hyper version of what they did for 40 years leading to this consent decree, right? Which is they typically brought in the police into the voting area, and they did pamphlets saying that we're going to arrest you as illegal voters, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they focused on black precincts, precincts in which blacks were heavily voters and such. You can send ICE into these things. They'll just happen to be doing a raid at the time. And you can see they'll get pushback, and then they'll start arresting people, and then they'll close down the whole voting in an area that has, heavy minority representation that they think is going to be heavily democratic and such. So we have not begun to see the type of things. And, the Democrats would be well advised to bring that kind of litigation and try to get a decree from judges prohibiting this kind of interference. I mean, even if you lose it, at least you fight on it and you start getting it in people's minds as to what's coming.
Louis, I'll direct the question to you. Do you care to respond?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, as I said earlier, the Insurrection Act is going to be applied. And when it happens, we're really talking about martial law that will descend on that area of the country. And that alone during an election period could have catastrophic effect on the voting in those areas. And I do think this is obviously a plan. And I think another thing that people, along with what just talked about with the Nazis, essentially slogans, but keep in mind that President Trump, in talking with the New York Times reporters, said there are no limits to his power. He was as clear as day, is that the only limit that he has is his own morality, which has to really be zero.
Scary.
Mark, you were in Auschwitz this summer. I think that's not a bad place to consider where this conversation is going.
No, that I mean there's so many of the same earmarks. The othering of people that's going on is and it's easy for some people to fall into. But look, that's why we have to be vigilant. We have to fight every battle. We have to bring every lawsuit that has to be brought. We have to, and I give credit to, because I think we've been doing a pretty good job of that. I mean, let's look at just a simple thing. They tried to stop addiction treatment this week, and they didn't even have to get as far as filing a lawsuit before the Trump administration turned tail and went backwards. They did a great. The community was mobilized. They reached out to their representatives. Remember, every time they do one of these things, the local Republican congressman has to take a stand. I mean, we have a congressman here, Max Miller, who took a horrific stand on the Minnesota shooting. That was embarrassing to us in the community, and should be embarrassing to a young man who comes from a good family who should know better. That made that statement. Well, at the end of the day, that's going to inure to the benefit of his Democratic opponent, in assuming we can keep the elections safe, and keep and have the elections happen. So I don't think they quite understand how they're actually, from a political standpoint, they're I think they're sealing their own fate in terms of the outcome of the midterm elections. I mean, one of his opponents, there's a number of Democrats running for this seat, which is not it's not an easy pickup, but there's a chance with such a strong wind for Democrats that they could take this seat. Is that it's maybe they should think twice about fucking with middle-aged white women, because those are the swing voters that are gonna control this election. And when they are mobilized, and that's a group of people that are formidable and to be reckoned with. And if there are people throughout the country that can see themselves through this poor mom in Minnesota that was murdered in cold blood in front of the entire community, in front of the entire country, that's a very strong motivator to get more focused on this upcoming election. And so it's almost, they've almost got Republican Congress members around the country defending the indefensible. And at the end of the day, that their only chance this time around may be to try to find some way to throw a wrench into the election, which is why I think everybody's suggestions about getting ahead of this curve, and getting those consent orders in place, and getting clarity, all the lawyers on this group know how hard it is to get the court to give advice prior to something actually happening. But I think there's enough cause for concern here, in fact, and even in losing, there's winning, because we can lay out what the risks and possibilities are, and making it that much easier to come in the day after and get this damage undone if it has to be done. So that's my hope, that try to find some positive out of this tragedy, and it just. I can't. I mean, I personally can't watch that video. I mean, it's just among the most disturbing things I've ever seen. But it's real. It happened. It's in the United States of America, and it happened today, or today or last week, and it could happen again tomorrow. So we have no room for error in our strategies. We need to protest peacefully. We need to sue and raise every possible issue. We need local Democratic officials and Republican officials who are law-abiding people who follow the rule of law to do their job every single day, without fear or favor. And if that happens, perhaps we will fare better than the Weimar Republic did in the 1930s.
Yep.
Well, plenty of lessons to be gleaned, obviously, for those who've ever engaged Nazi history. And of course, least we forget that the Nazis, or I should say Hitler, borrowed a lot of his inspiration for the Nuremberg laws from our very own Jim Crow laws, which of course came from none other than the Confederacy, which of course brings us full circle to MAGA, right? And where we are. And so Big Poppy, you have stepped up to the plate and threw a grand slam. Big Poppy on occasion has done that more than one time in his career. Do you want to give us any closing comments before we head out of here?
Who's Big Poppy?
Yeah. I'm trying to
Poppy,
figure.
come on.
Let me give you the weather report on what the Nazis are going to face. It's currently 14 degrees, and with wind chill, it's -1. So
Yeah.
welcome to Minnesota, neo-Nazis.
The weather is so nice there. But Paul, do you have
As a Red Sox fan, I'm hoping you talk with me. Just a brief point to enhance June's and I think Eric's point on ICE. At least one purpose of ICE is as provocateurs. So in Miami, we reviewed at the U.S. Attorney's Office a lot of police shootings, and invariably everyone I can ever recall was police shooting at a bad guy or a perceived bad guy. And there's all kinds of rules that police are supposed to follow around those shootings. In this, and almost always, they're clearly taking a law enforcement action against a person that they perceive to be a bad guy. In this case, I defy anybody to tell me what law enforcement action that shooter was taking. What was he doing? He was not doing anything. He wasn't clearing traffic. He wasn't doing anything. He was walking around taking pictures. He was a provocateur. That is all he was. And it wasn't until, and by the way, the law enforcement vehicles, as we saw from that video today in the New York Times, and we've seen it all along, were passing her. So what happened was, as you saw, these two guys stopped, these two other provocateurs, and they just started trying to get in her car. And she did anything. She did what a lot of people would do when people with masks and guns come up to your car, and she took off. And you could tell she was scared because she left her wife standing there, right? She was trying to get away, and she wasn't trying to run over anybody. And he shouldn't have been there in the first place. So my only point is, and then as she leaves, it's clear he's a provocateur, because after he fucking shoots her in the face 3 times, well, 1 time in the shoulder, and 2 times after she's gone past him, which is, you can't shoot, even if you thought you were preventing something. He says, fucking bitch. And everybody knows that's what he said. And then they wouldn't let doctors there. And then he walked away from the scene. He was 100% a provocateur, and everybody saw that.
Yeah, and 82% of the American public saw it, and they are reacting in a very negative way toward ICE. They have a problem, and I think that is at least a hopeful note that this thing can be turned around.
Yeah.
Well, I know I can speak for my close colleague Eric Vaughn and myself when I say how honored we are to be surrounded by literally some of the best prosecutors and legal experts in this country's history that have taken on the most powerfully criminally corrupt and corrosive aspects of our society and around the world. And I must urge you who are watching this, we are building this audience. I see it every week. There's more and more eyeballs. These experts deserve tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of viewers, given what's happening in mainstream media, given what's happening with so-called influencers who know nothing about the law, and they're not talking to these experts. We are so grateful to all of you, which I affectionately call the new Untouchables. But if there was ever a time in our country's history for superheroes to step into the frickin' void, it's now. And you guys do it week in, week out. You do it for free because you believe in the country. And I am so inspired by that. Please, everyone, check out the new Untouchables.com. We'll have more information coming down the pike. Check out the Government Accountability Project. Please check out the cleannewdeal.org. And I'll just say we've gone long, but thank you guys for everything. And
wait a minute, Patrick. We're not getting paid for this?
Oh my goodness.
The check's in the mail, Paul.
Tell you that.
I just need to talk to some of Trump's fraudster guys and see if I can backdoor something here. But
You got some crypto coming your way. Don't
Oh
worry.
yeah, there we go. You got some crypto coming your way. All right, listen, thank you so much, guys, and until next time, the new Untouchables. I'm Patrick Lovell. Take care. All the best.